You may be wondering why you all got up early in the morning in a conference named or focused on being bold to hear from someone, me, who had one job in my lifetime, who comes from a sector of the economy, the labor movement, which is known for anything but being bold, and who's going to talk to you about an idea that 2 years ago I had no idea what it was, universal basic income. So I think I owe you a little explanation of how I got here. So I spent 38 years of my life in a wonderful job. I loved my work. I got to work with janitors and home care and security officers, child care workers, people who are, in general, the powerless, and through our union became far more powerful. And together we became the fastest growing union in the world. We grew 1.2 million members. We developed the largest political action committee in the country, gave $80 million to the election of Barack Obama, spent 5 years preparing for a universal basic income for a universal health care campaign, and then was fortunate to see President Obama sign that into law. We were able to try to change the AFL-CIO by leaving the AFL-CIO and trying to build something new. I became somewhat notorious in Washington, D.C. I was the most frequent visitor to the White House for the first year of the Obama administration. I was appointed to Simpson-Bowles Commission, and then I did something that no one in Washington ever does, which is I quit. I quit because my job was to change other people's lives. My job was to gain market share if I was a business. And yet I worked at a time where wages were falling, unions were shrinking, inequality was growing. And here I was on the top of a very powerful organization, and I didn't know where it needed to go. And I left to both figure out for myself what was going on in America, and at the same time, turn it over to people who at least had the energy and the willingness and the time to try to figure this out. And I began a 3-year journey, and I just want to tell you what I found and what it made me think about. First of all, I was very lucky, if the slide will come, whoops, that's the back slide, let's go back one. I was very lucky to meet Andy Grove at the very beginning of my journey. And although he had no particular great wisdom about what I was trying to figure out, he talked about, which I think is enormously important for our country or for companies, about a strategic inflection points. These are when a confluence of events, no particular event, but a confluence of events come together to create a turning point. And as he talks about, most of them appear slowly. Most of them can only be seen in retrospect, and denial is the first reaction. And I remember that conversation. I could tell you the story about his book, Only the Paranoid Survive, and how he and Gordon Moore actually were bold and reinvented Intel at a time when it almost got taken over, they almost got fired. But he helped frame this conversation. Because what I learned was if you want to rename the United States right now, you would rename it the United States of Anxiety. Only 21%, despite all the statistics about the economy and GDP, only 21% of Americans think the economy is excellent or very good. 52% of Americans, sadly, no longer think their children will live a better life than they do. And the remarkable statistic, which I now is somewhat in the ethos, is that 47% of Americans could not find $400 in case of emergency. That's half of Americans couldn't do that. So if you wonder what Donald Trump and Bernie Sanders, the fuel they're running on, it is legitimate anxiety of people where an economy no longer works for them despite all signs to the contrary. And so let's explain what was the 20th century economy and what's the 21st century economy. 20th century economy was fabulous. And people talked about the economy using one word, and they would say the economy is growing. And what they really meant was 4 things were happening at the same time. The economy was growing, productivity was growing, wages and jobs were growing. And those 4 lines represent the gift of the market economy and somewhat the gift of unions in the 20th century. And then as we talk about in strategic inflection points, something began to happen that we didn't understand for a very long time, that's now common knowledge, was the economy grew, GDP grew, productivity grew, but wages stopped growing. Took us about 10 years to realize we're now in about 20 years of wage stagnation. You can see that line, pyramid income. The income line, the green line, fell off the growth train in the 1980s. And now what we don't want to admit, the 21st century economy is not only has growth fallen off the train, but jobs have fallen off the train. So now you can have GDP growth and productivity growth without wage growth and without job growth. And that's what's happened in America. We have had no new net jobs in traditional 40-hour-a-week employer-managed situations since 2005. This is the job growth that we're seeing. The red line in the middle is the middle-class jobs. We see we lost a lot of them in the recession, and we can now see the growth since the recession has been mostly in low-wage jobs. So we now have an economy that is producing more and more low-wage jobs, and we have the United States of anxiety. The second thing I learned, you all know, it's kind of in the atmosphere now, it's just the end of the employer-managed work life. I had one of those great jobs like people did at IBM or other big companies. Employer managed my salary, the employer managed my health care, the employer managed my pension, my disability, my career, my job, my placement around the world. It was an extraordinary opportunity. I just worked and someone else managed everything for me. And now, we all know we're moving from an employer-managed work life to a self-managed work life. McKinsey just came out with a study. 30% of people are free agents who actively choose independent work. 40% are casual earners. But overall, the research suggests that 54 to 68 million people are independent earners in the United States. They are self-managing their work life in a world where EITC and other kinds of benefits we have, health care, pensions, used to be managed by their employer. Not only are they now trying to deal with the independent contractor and all the issues about working on your own, which has a lot of flexibility and positive natures to it else, but they're also trying to deal with self-managing their work life. So now we have employers and employees are getting divorced. We now have the largest number of kids living in their home. For parents like me, that is the end of the American dream. When your kid moves back after he goes to college, maybe the end of their dream in one way, it's the end of your dream in somewhat another way. And we now know, if you want to summarize the economy of today versus the economy of the 20th century, it goes like this. The largest publishing company in the world is Facebook. It produces no content. The largest accommodation company in the world is Airbnb. It owns no hotel rooms. The largest transportation company in the world is Uber. It has no cars. And the largest retailers in the world are Alibaba and Amazon. They have no stores, or at least up to now they haven't had any stores. That is the American economy today. We are at a strategic inflection point. That is not your father's and grandfather's economy. Something very different is happening. And if that was all that was happening, we could solve that problem. It would take a lot of work, but we have lots of solutions. Here's the kicker in all of this that I learned. There is reputable research, growing reputable research, about a tsunami of technological change that's going to roll across the labor market. Here's McKinsey, not necessarily hysterical people that a lot of you probably use in your business or in your companies, saying 45% of all tasks can be eliminated now, 13% more if artificial intelligence is commercially deployed. Here's Oxford University, 47% of all jobs. Here's Pew, asked almost 2,000 experts. Half of them say a future which robots and digital aids have displaced a significant number of both blue and, most importantly, white-collar workers, and expressing concern that masses of people who are effectively unemployable may end up breaking down the social order. Larry Summers says 1/4 of all men will be unemployed, prime-age men at any one time in the next generation. We have reports now from the World Bank that estimated last week that automation threatens to eliminate 77% of the jobs in China, 85% in Ethiopia. The ILO comes out with a report that says of technology, footwear, clothing, textiles, 86% of the jobs in Vietnam can be eliminated, 88% in Cambodia. And this is not about the end of work. It's this constant downward pressure we're facing in the employment market, where white-collar jobs, right now even more than blue-collar jobs, I come from Columbia University, the biggest job the MBAs from Columbia used to get when they left school was they go down and be stock traders or stock analysts. And anybody who's been down to the stock market knows it's Potemkin Village. They haven't traded stocks on those floors in a very long time. Algorithms and mathematical wizards now trade stocks, not young kids out of college with MBAs any more than they do basic research, which can now all be done. Same thing's true if you're law school. 30% decrease in applications. Why? Because lawyers can't find jobs. The lowest number of lawyers were placed in employment last year any time in history. Why? Keyword searches, other kinds of technological inventions that have eliminated a lot of the grunt work that workers used to do as entry-level lawyers that can now be done by computers, not to mention being able, because of software, to shift jobs around the world. And I got to give Stephen Birkenfeld, who is a BSR member, a lot of credit here because he kind of opened my whole mind to this whole question. It's not about robotics as much as it is about software, which fuels just-in-time production, which allows us to do globalization and global finance. It's really not yet the robots, although they're on their way. It really is the change in the nature of how software has allowed us to work. So where does this all gonna take us to? Well, the largest job, and when is this really gonna happen? What we're also learning is things are happening way faster than we ever expected. Now, I never thought I could go to Pittsburgh and call an Uber that was driverless on my car right now. I never thought I'd see Uber's Otto deliver Budweiser beer 100 miles where the driver was in the back seat where they normally sleep, not sitting right by the steering wheel, or see trucks drive across Europe, one with a driver, four not attached other than by technology, 150 miles across the entire Europe. Go up to Memorial Sloan Kettering, you'll find out that Watson is competing with the doctors into diagnosing lung cancer. Guess who's winning? Just like he won chess, just like he won Go, just like he won Jeopardy, Watson is winning the diagnosis of cancer at Memorial Sloan Kettering because he can read 3,000 medical journal articles every month. And don't ask your doctor if he read the last 3,000 that came up. So things are changing. And driverless trucks will be the tipping point, in my humble opinion. It is the largest job, truck driving, in 29 states. Second largest in 10 or 12 more. Spread all throughout the United States. 3.5 million truck drivers, 5 million people supporting those truck drivers. That's a lot of jobs. And anybody who tells you we're not going to have driverless trucks technologically, has not been reading or watching what's going on. Regulatorily, yes, that's going to be an issue, but we will solve for that issue either by people just doing it or by the fact that the market is just going to have such incentives to do this, it will figure out a way to be done. That's going to be a remarkable, potential change in the job market, and you can keep going on occupation by occupation. So what do we do? Which is probably the question now that you're all depressed. Maybe you're a Cubs fan, you're feeling better about today than the Cleveland fans. So what do we do? So the first thing we do not do, that no responsible business would do, no responsible government should do, but which academics do every time, is we have a debate about whether this is true or not. Is this time different or isn't this time different? Can you imagine the military saying, is ISIS going to attack Aleppo or not? Let's debate that. No, they would create scenarios. The military is brilliant. It creates scenarios about what we're going to do if there's global warming. What's it going to do to the sub-Saharan region? What could it do if smallpox is somehow weaponized and released? They think about the future not because they know who's right or wrong. Anybody who knows what's right or wrong in the future, don't get into the debate about what's going to happen with technology. Buy stocks, buy bonds, bet at Las Vegas. There's a lot more money to be made than being an academic and debating the question, is this time different? And they are right, the academics. Every time up to now, the number of jobs were destroyed were replaced by jobs ultimately far greater than the ones that were destroyed. Now, anybody have read Charles Dickens? It wasn't a lot of fun during the transition. It's not a really good for the members that I represent. Elite people may be able to talk about this nicely, about, oh, we'll end up with more jobs, but a lot of people are going to be hurt along the way, and there's no reason for people to be hurt. So let's think about this in terms of risk management and scenario planning. So what should we do? I have one idea. It may not be a very good idea. It's an idea. And the idea is based on that half of the experts at Pew and McKinsey and people are right, and we are going to have to plan for a massive disruption in the labor market. My idea is an idea, actually, it's probably the oldest idea. I stole it from Thomas Paine. Thomas Paine, when the country was formed and we had gotten all this land back from the British, said, what are we going to do with all this land? And they all admitted we're going to sell it into private hands. And they said, well, why don't we give everybody in the United States, which probably was white men, 15 pounds sterling to compensate us for all this private land of the British that we're now going to sell to Americans. That would have been a universal basic income. It somewhat reminds you of the Alaska dividend, where we took all the extracted resources from the North Shore and we gave it back to people in a dividend. So the country that came closest to a universal basic income, which is just that, universal, everyone gets it, basic, not enough to sit home with your feet up on the desk, but a basic income, a floor, an income not related to work, not related to welfare, just universal. The country that came closest to doing it was the United States, Richard Nixon, Milton Friedman, not the left, the right. In fact, the Democrats defeated it in 1969 because they thought $10,000 a year was not enough. And they thought, we'll wait till we win the election and then we'll make it $12,000 a year. And that and health care haunted us for the rest of our lives. And instead we built this current welfare system, which is, then taking care of the needy and giving people all these categorical programs. And no one wants to remember is that Martin Luther King in his last book condemned the entire welfare system. He said then, like we said today, right now 15% of people are in poverty, 50 million people in the United States. Obviously the welfare system hasn't worked. Martin Luther King said, we didn't ask for a housing program, food stamp program, EITC program. We asked you to end poverty in the civil rights movement. If you want to end poverty, give people money. And my idea is just that. Let's do what Justin Trudeau's father did in Canada, what his son is doing now, what is being considered in Utrecht and Finland and countries around the world, India, is let's create a floor. Let's give every American $1,000 a month, 18 to 64. Believe it or not, that will make everyone above the poverty level, which is $11,997 a person right now. Everybody will get out of poverty, and we will create a floor underneath which people can take risks, people can have security, women can be compensated for what has been uncompensated work mostly, people can go out on strike, walk away from jobs because they will have a floor. Now, how do I know if this will work? Well, first of all, there's been a lot of experiments, and we need to do a lot more because no one really knows how this would work on a wide scale, how we could replace both the safety net as we currently know it and at the same time be able to prepare ourselves for a future that's very tumultuous. But what we do know is something that I bet a lot of you do right now. And I call that parental basic income. Okay? How many of you take your kids on a vacation? How many of you kids co-sign a lease? How do you parents let their kids live at home or give them money for insurance or a bill or to get married or to buy a house? We do that because it stabilizes our children's lives, not because we're just giving away things, and because it's hard out there for our kids to find jobs. When I graduated college, all you had to do was have a college degree or a union job, and you were fine in America. That's not so easy anymore. College degrees mean debt. It doesn't mean great jobs. Great jobs that we know are not being produced and are harder to find. And so it's hard out there for kids, and a lot of parents put a safety net, a parental basic income around them or under them, however it works. And the dirty little secret about entrepreneurship in the country, all the people in Silicon Valley in those garages, they are not the sons and daughters of my janitors and childcare workers. They are the sons and daughters of much more successful people whose kids can afford to spend 2 years in a garage building the next app. And right now, the dirty other little secret about Columbia University is if you can't find a job, you go to one of these little incubators they formed, and you sit there, and you say you're building an app or building a business when really you're unemployed. But it sounds a lot better, when you're an MBA and you can't find a job to say you're building an app or building a business, but that's really not the reality. So universal basic income is an idea that will both end poverty, make the welfare system that we currently have that's awfully dehumanizing to people. We're now drug testing people who are unemployed to see if they're really not working because they're taking drugs as opposed to all the jobs left Youngstown, Ohio, and there's not a lot of work to be done. It ends poverty, it provides stability, and I would say it, like democracy, is a terrible idea, as Winston Churchill said, until you try everything else. So if you think for risk management and scenario planning that we are going to have a huge disruption in the labor market, if you think it's going to last long enough, we need to do something either as a transition or as a permanent solution, then what's your idea? Now, a lot of my friends, they're the progressives in the world, they have a great idea. They call it the WPA. I mean, that's as much intellectual thinking we've done about guaranteed jobs. We talk about, let's go back to the WPA. Now, we are as far today from the WPA and the New Deal as the New Deal was from the Civil War. In fact, we're farther away. Now, how in the world do you think Franklin Roosevelt looked at Abraham Lincoln and said, let's build an economy around 1865 any more than we're going to build an economy around 1935? You know what people did in the WPA? They left their home and they went into rural areas and they built roads and they cleared forests. It was all wonderful work. Is anybody here going to send their kid to do that for the rest of their life? Is that our answer? Or I just want to know if the college-educated kids of today who can't find jobs in infrastructure, if that's one of the alternatives for our guaranteed jobs, and the other is always child care and home care, I just want to know, is your kid going to change my feeding tube when I get old? Because if he is, then maybe he should have a guaranteed job. I don't think that's what your aspirations are. And the one thing we really don't know, and the one job we need a lot more now, is philosophers. Because we don't really know what life is going to be like. Certainly people like me who are so work-centric, who love my job, who can't imagine not working, what it's going to be like for our grandkids or our great-grandkids who are going to enter a world that's very different, and we should plan a future for them, not a future for me. So I love this country. I happen to think America is the greatest gift we've had, and the greatest gift was the American dream, that children did better than their parents. And now we can see on the horizon a big threat that's built on top of a huge problem, which we don't have wage growth and job growth now, and then Sandy in steroids is coming our way to disrupt our labor market, and we need ideas. We have plenty of wealth in this country, we have plenty of talent, we just are not bold. We are not courageous enough for a single politician in this country to come out and say, we have a problem coming our way and we have to get ready. And I want to thank President Obama, who last week in an interview with Wired magazine started that conversation. And I said earlier today, because an earlier speaker was from Canada, that Justin Trudeau may end up being the leader of the American thought process because he's young, no offense meant to Donald and Hillary. He is new thinking, he has a parliamentary majority, he has just implemented a universal child care, a child grant, which I think will be what happens next in the United States and should happen. We'll have a universal child grant, so every child, particularly 0 to 3, when a lot of development works and where we have no public programs, maybe we can do the Alaska dividend type thing and give it to people. How do we pay for it? I wrote a whole book on this. I can go through it with you. I'm not. I would just say, in the greatest country in the world, we can do better. We have to do better because the future is not a matter of chance. It's a matter of choice. Change is inevitable. It's progress that's optional. And leadership and being bold makes the difference. Thanks.